Where is God in all this? Wigiat. It's a word that Tara Hornbacher, professor at Bethany Seminary, has coined to remind her students that as Christians, we are always to be seeking God's presence and God's intervention. That wherever we are and whatever we're doing, in whatever phase of life we find ourselves, God is there. Part of our faith journey is to look for God. And so the question, Wigiat. Today I struggled to write an insightful sermon. I spent hours, literally, and my family can attest to this, combing a variety of commentaries. I typed and I retyped and I rearranged paragraphs, thinking about where is God in all this. Because these two stories that Adam read today are so clearly God speaking. And I'm a bit jealous of that because, I don't know about you, but in my life, God doesn't always speak so clearly. As I struggled to write, the words didn't go together smoothly, the paragraphs were disjointed, and finally I thought, I give up. I literally gave up. And I found a story for you today, because oftentimes the best sermons come from stories. After all, the Bible is the ultimate story, right, with a capital S? The ultimate story of God's intervention in mankind. And so today I have a story with a small s for us about God's intervention in the lives of ordinary people. People who were as ordinary as David when he was a shepherd before he became king, and Mary when she was nothing but a handmaiden in Nazareth before the angel came to visit. The year was 1954. There was a very young pastor who'd been called to shepherd a church that was very old. And once upon a time, a long time ago, that church had been famous. It had flourished, and well-known pastors had preached from its pulpit and prayed before its altars. Rich and poor alike had worshipped there and had built it beautifully. But now the good days had passed. And all that was left was this very huge, very drafty building and a very small congregation in a bad section of town. And there was a young pastor who was called there, and with his equally young wife, they believed that God still had a purpose for that rundown church. They felt that with paint and hammer and faith, they could get it in shape, and together they went to work. But late in December, a severe storm ripped through the valley. Rain fell onto the old leaky roof, and a big chunk of plaster fell out of the front of the altar. It was 2 days before Christmas, and the pastor and his wife swept out the debris, but they looked at this hole in the altar and they knew there was nothing they could do to make the church more beautiful or to hide that hole. The pastor looked at it and he reminded himself, God is here. And his wife looked at it and she cried, but Christmas is only 2 days away. That afternoon, the couple found themselves at an auction that was benefiting a local youth center. And the auctioneer pulled out this old box and he starts pulling fabric. Yards and yards and yards of fabric. It must have been 15 feet long. And it was this gorgeous gold and cream and lace embroidered tablecloth. Well, nobody has a 15-foot table. What would anybody want at this tablecloth? And a couple of people made some half-hearted bids when suddenly the pastor had this unique inspiration. He thought that would cover the hole. He bid on it and he got it for $6.50. What a bargain, right? They came back, he carried it back, he tacked up this beautiful fabric on the wall behind the altar. And it was perfect for Christmas because it was shiny and there was this ornate, beautiful handwork on it. With the shimmering of the lights on the chancel, it glowed. He was very happy and he went back to his house to prepare his sermon. On the day of Christmas Eve, around lunchtime, the pastor headed over to the church to do a few things, and as he was unlocking the church, he noticed there was a woman standing by the bus stop. He hollered out to her, "The bus won't be here for another 40 minutes. Why don't you come in and get warm? There's no sense getting cold." He sat down and he visited with her a little bit in the church, and she was telling him that she had brought the bus down from the city to interview for a job as a nanny, as a governess to some children there in the town. She had not gotten the job, and she was sort of discouraged, but she was headed back to the city. She was a war refugee, but her English was perfect. After they'd sat there for a while, and the woman was warming her hands and resting, and he left her alone, and he walked away and started doing some other things, and she was praying. And after a bit, she looks up, and she looks at the altar, and she gets up, and she starts to go towards the altar, and the pastor sees her go up and touch this tablecloth, and he starts to tell her about the auction and the hole in the plaster, and she's not listening. She's feeling the tablecloth, and she's lifting it under the edge, and she says, "It's mine. It is my banquet cloth." And she lifted up this corner, and she showed the surprised pastor that there were initials monogrammed on it. "My husband had the cloth made especially for me in Brussels. There could not be another like it." And for the next few minutes, the woman and the pastor talked excitedly, and she explained that she was Viennese and that her husband and she had opposed the Nazis, and they realized that it was going to be impossible for them to live in their country, and they were trying to get out. And they had tickets for the train to go to Switzerland, and they were told that it would be safer if they go separately. And so they did. The husband put the wife on the train to Switzerland, and he promised, "I will see you soon." Only he never had. She had traveled to Switzerland. She'd eventually found her way to America, and she'd lost track of her husband. She had heard through the grapevine that he had died in the concentration camps. And she always blamed herself that she shouldn't have left, that if she had stayed, things would have been different. She said, "I feel like it is my punishment that I must live with this guilt." The pastor tried to give her the tablecloth. He tried to convince her that it was not punishment from God and she should take it home. And she wouldn't, and eventually she left. The bus came and took her back to the city. The church began to fill that evening for Christmas Eve, and it was clear that the tablecloth was going to be a great success. It had been skillfully designed to look its best by candlelight. After the service, the pastor stood in the doorway and greeted him, and many people told him how much they appreciated the beauty of the church and the work that he and his young wife had been doing to revitalize their congregation. But one gentle-faced, middle-aged man, who was the local clock and watch repairman, stopped him, and he looked puzzled. "It is strange," he said. "Many years ago, my wife, God rest her soul, and I owned such a cloth. In our home in Vienna, my wife would put it on the table," and he smiled, "only when the bishop came to dinner." The pastor became very excited, and he told the jeweler about the woman who'd been in the church earlier that day. The startled jeweler clutched his arm. "Can it be? Does she live?" Together, the two of them got in touch with the family who had interviewed her and got her address. They climbed into the pastor's car, and as Christmas Eve turned into Christmas Day, this man and his wife, who'd been separated through so many saddened Yuletides, were reunited. To all who heard this story, the joyful purpose of the storm that had knocked a hole in the wall of the church was quite clear. Of course, people said it was a miracle. True love seems to find a way. True love finds a way. God, who is in himself love incarnate, finds a way to speak to us, to intervene in the lives of his people. In good times and bad times, they are all God times, right? They are all times when God is present. Do you sense God's presence in your life this Christmas season? Many members of our congregation have been swept away by storms in the last few years. We sometimes feel like our personal bodies, our temples of God, are like that old church with the crumbled plaster. Parts of us are missing. Parts of us are disfigured or damaged. Where is God in all this? Well, let's look back to the story. Notice that the plaster did not get fixed, right? Instead, God used the broken plaster to bring together a couple who had been separated for almost a decade. God may not fix our crumbled lives or take away our disfigurement or our scars, but God can use those things to bring people together with Jesus. What if that young pastor had not heard the voice of God nudging him to bid on the tablecloth at the auction? What if he'd not invited the woman into the church sanctuary to stay warm? What if the elderly clock and watch repairman had decided not to go to church that evening because he was angry at God for the loss of his wife and the war that pushed him out of his homeland? God works in the lives of people, but people have to participate, right? When Mary was approached by the angel, she could have refused. She could have said, "Not me, thank you very much. Find some other young lady to do your plan." God comes and speaks. David could have gone ahead and built the house of God, but God wouldn't have been in the work. The characters of the Bible teach us over and over that in the big story of life, the capital S story that includes God, we need to hear. We need to participate. We need to say, "Your will be done." As Advent comes to an end and Christmas approaches, we look at our lives and the life of our church and we ask, where is God in all this? What extraordinary and grace-filled things have happened in your life, and what extraordinary and graceful things may yet happen? Are we, like Mary, willing to say yes to what God is doing? May this final week, as we approach Christmas, as we finish our wrapping and our shopping and our preparations for holiday meals, this final week before the mystery is revealed, let us look for God. Let us look for the angels who are speaking softly. May we know God's presence and hear his voice.